Okay, I take the opportunity to first express my gratitude that we can have such a session. When we talked about today, we remarked that it is probably all our experience that we work on projects, especially those that are highly interdisciplinary, that halfway in the project or close to the end, we realize that we have different understandings of the same terms. Now, when I had one of my first projects like this, it was on the societal implications of nanomedicine, that we realized quite late in the project, we talked about risk. And we meant totally different things. We had a legal expert, and we had the chemists and nanoscientists in the project, and they all have different ideas in mind when we talk about risk. So we thought, why didn't we talk about it in the beginning? And I think that's what we should do now, really, in the very beginning, okay, after the proposal drafting, where we already had a lot of content discussions. But I think now is a good time to do it, also to kind of align and get into it. So we want to clarify terminology. That's one thing. We want to avoid misunderstandings. But I think what it can also foster is the process of co-creation that we want to engage in. That we all come with different backgrounds. We will sit together in the work packages, working on tasks. So I expect that we will not maybe accomplish the first goal, like that we clarify everything. But we will get a feeling in this, perhaps 1 hour, for being open-minded, for learning, for listening to the others and saying, okay, maybe I should not really get stuck on my own definition of the term. I think this is a theme we will come back to in this session. So one thing I'd like to share with you is an insight I had from a science communication workshop, and that is when we want to start talking about something, be it in a research paper, be it at a presentation, or when we meet at conferences like this, like we want to introduce what we are doing. This is called in science communication fields the so-called kitchen call. Imagine your partner in the kitchen and you in the living room, or vice versa. Maybe you are in the kitchen, your partner in the living room, and the partner calls. So what are you doing? What are you working on? What's that project about? You will shout back approximately 3 sentences. And it's really a good technique to reflect, and I recommend you do that at some point. We will not do it now, but just think of what would be the 3 sentences you say. And if this is more or less internalized, I think it already starts the process of understanding what the endeavor is. I can quickly share mine just to introduce this session, what we will talk about in this project. Yeah, that we hope that with the insights collected in the RE4GREEN project, that we intend to advise the European Commission on how to adequately integrate like research integrity and environmental or climate ethics considerations into the governance of the green transition policy. So the goal is to bridge academic scientific expertise, professional research and innovation practice, policy making. So thus, we employ a participative and interdisciplinary approach to bring all stakeholders together, listen, learn, make recommendations, and train commissioners who will in the end oversee the Green Deal. So that would be mine, and I'm sure if you do that, it will be different. So when looking at this project outline, there's many terms in it that I think have the potential of misunderstanding, different perspectives, different definitions, and some clashes later on in the work. I tried to map this. Of course, this is not just my work. We did this in meetings when we prepared the kick-off meeting. What are the terms that we expect would cause at least some questions, or some of you have an idea but not sure if that is the idea that we should all have, or maybe it's different altogether. So don't read them all now. Let's start with that group of concepts that are kind of fundamental, that coincides with them coming earlier in the project description, because they are mostly from work package 1, 2, and 3. So obviously we have a strong applied ethics theme in all of the project work. We want to combine research ethics with environmental and climate ethics. And that shall be a practicable orientation for policymakers and commissioners. So research ethics, when I talk to chemists, I once was a chemist, about research ethics, they think that's all about not faking data, or not plagiarizing, or about being committed to virtues like objectivity and truthfulness. So my question first is then, is that all there is? I ask Mats Sørensen from Denmark, whose expertise can help us here. Is it all about good scientific practice?
So, yeah, I would say that good...
I have one more request. Sorry, I didn't mention that in the beginning. Even though we can understand each other, but for the sake of recording the video and the sound quality, when you are asked, could you please use the microphone that's nearest to you?
We'll do that. So, I think good scientific practices, I see them more as research integrity, belonging to the research integrity. When we talk about research ethics, I think Diego already talked about it in your opening note. It's essentially understood as the protection of research participants, at least the traditional take on this. So to take care of participants' rights, safety, welfare, and of course it's something different we want to do. We want to move from this research ethics version 1.0 to a new, much more holistic way of thinking about research ethics, including things like social value, the social value of a project, the community and not just the individual participating, the environment, climate questions, and some of the things that Diego also talked about. So yeah.
So can I express it like this? There is, so to say, an internal responsibility dimension that is about like codes of conduct and what does it mean to be a good researcher or scientist, and then there is this kind of external responsibility dimension that says there is somehow well, obligation perhaps to consider the impacts on society and environment?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to so integrity, research integrity practices is really about living up to professional standards, institutional standards, legal standards for how to conduct your research. And it's very much about yourself and how you behave when you do your research. Whereas ethics is much more about other people and other things. Yeah. So, and I guess we want to have a more inclusive concept of what others and other things are here in this project. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, I jumped right into the topic without explaining. Beforehand, I contacted some of you because we believed we want to have a conversation, and some of you have something important to say about these contexts. So you knew if I wrote an email to you. But of course, we should have a conversation. So if there's any questions at any time where you say, I'm still not sure if I got the idea right, or I think there might be misunderstanding, please raise your hands. That's what we are here for, to have, I mean, the group is nicely big, but also, let's say, small enough to have a conversation rather than a presentation here of themes. So, okay, there's a question.
So I'm still not sure I got the idea right. In fact, but I'd like to understand that last point you made. So you said, you both actually, you said it's not anymore just about, the integrity of doing research. It's also not anymore just about how we work with our participants. I assume participants could be animals, humans, maybe plants as well. It's also about the research impacts. So what does that mean? What does that really entail in terms of doing, natural sciences, experiments in the fields, developing technologies? So does that mean we have to start thinking about how our technologies are going to be used by society, anticipate that in the research process, and make sure they're used sustainably or ethically, or is that going too far? So I'm just trying to grasp the system boundaries of what we're talking about here.
Someone wants to answer that question? Okay.
I mean, both of you mentioned, from my perspective, a very important aspect. What is our role in research, science, in a larger societal framework? I mean, also research and science is a social practice. And some of you saw probably the movie Oppenheimer. and maybe others know the movie Copenhagen. All this is about how are scientific developments integrated in societal practices of different kinds. I mean, that's energy, yeah, in this manner, but when we talk about environmental, it's not only energy, it's also energy, it is food, it is health, forestry, etc., etc., etc. So what is our role, responsibility, and that's much more than just scientific integrity, as Mats already said. So I think it's exactly what you asked. Is it more than this? I personally think, yes, it's more. And we need, in particular when we receive tax money, public money for our research, to justify what we are doing, in particular in larger corporations. And therefore, I think this expands also what is set down in the European Code of Conduct. So what does it mean when it says, what I quoted, respect for ecosystem, respect for society, respect for environment. So, and I think this is a core aspect what we need to discuss with different disciplines here. And what we personally think, what is our role? I mean, Werner von Braun said once, it's not upon us. We do research, yeah? But the responsibility is with the society. So whether a knife is used by a murderer or by a surgeon, so that's not a scientific responsibility. But I think this changed very deeply.
I want to add something about the practical implications of that. That when 10 years ago I worked in this nano medicine project, I heard from the scientific partners in the project, okay, you do your ethics in your work package and let me do my lab work. And I think that doesn't work. I also observed that in the past, especially 10 years, with responsible research and innovation concepts and a whole discipline, I mean, technology assessment, it is here in Germany, in the Netherlands, it's strong in Denmark, with the input from science and technology studies, that we became very pragmatic in saying, what does it really mean for integrated or integrating or maybe integrative research? That there's many practical methodologies to say, okay, we want the people to do their core expertise as researchers, as lab scientists perhaps, but at the same time there are simple ways of integrating normative considerations maybe by design into their actual work. I don't want to expand too much on that now because then we take the whole time for that. If there is no other urgent question, I'd like to go on to the next term, which is the environmental ethics. So now my observation here is that on the one side, it can be very, so to say, theoretical, yeah, that in environmental ethics, it's about discussing non-anthropocentric values in nature, sometimes with far-reaching implications, like, for example, granting plants moral standings. On the other side, again, this is maybe the practitioner's side, environmental ethics is perceived as being all about sustainability. Like an ethicist will say, I consider environmental ethics by saying I substitute a toxic chemical with a non-toxic one. So then obviously there is some mismatch. So my question is for Dominic Lenzi, how practicable is environmental ethics and what's more to it than just sustainability?
Yeah, thanks. It's difficult to answer that question without saying more about what environmental ethics is. So I'll just tell a bit of a story with the board here, and then I can come back to the question. So what it is, as you said, probably the fundamental critique in environmental ethics is about human-centeredness. So we caused our environmental problems by thinking about what's valuable for us and not for the rest of life on the planet or the planet itself. And therefore, we have to change our values and our orientation to the world. That's basically the idea that's been going since the 70s, trying to make sense of that kind of argument in moral philosophy, political theory, economics, and so on. So there's tons to say about that. But right from the beginning, actually, ecofeminism played a big role. So you're going to say a bit more about that in a bit, in understanding how we got into this mess, making critiques of gendered ways of doing science and doing policy that also lead to environmentally bad outcomes. So these kind of co-evolved fields. And if I would say, if you change applied ethics to climate ethics is a version of applied ethics, this is really a different track entirely. So when people talk about climate ethics, they're usually talking about justice for humans, future generations. That's it. So that question about non-humans and the relationship to nature is really a background consideration, if it's mentioned at all. So these kind of developed in a different direction. One other thing I'd like to mention before answering the question is this intercultural perspective. So environmental ethics began kind of as a North American discussion, primarily, global North led, Anglophone primarily. And at a certain point, scholars and practitioners realized that, hey, there's many ways of articulating what values we have with respect to the non-human world, different ways of conceptualizing nature, including ways that don't use or recognize the concept of nature, which is a bit tricky to understand, and that these perspectives really should be thought about in thinking about, well, what is the future? What is sustainability? Where are we going for? What are we aiming for? So the more recent work in environmental ethics is trying to do this, which is really hard because it means challenging where you're coming from fundamentally, what evidence you take to be serious evidence, what values you take to be admissible when you're doing your science or building your policy. And that's why that question that Jan asked is so difficult, right? Because if you say, well, how do you make any of this very theoretical stuff operational? You need to know what it is that you're aiming for, right? So if I were to say, okay, let's do an operational framework based on a particular North American environmental ethics tradition, you would say, well, clearly that's limited, right? You're backgrounding all this other stuff that I just mentioned. So the question is really, how do you bring in a plurality of moral perspectives here into an operational framework? So that's quite hard. And I think plural methods and approaches also means openness to different kinds of evidence, different knowledge systems. So that's really a challenge. But I think that's a really exciting thing about this project, that we can try to do that. We can take a kind of plural lens here. So that's a very long-winded answer to your question.
Okay, I don't see fingers, so I tell how we got to the next part, and that is we had a bit of discussion because I first intuitively grouped the do no significant harm principle with the line to applied ethics. And then we said, no, that has to do with the green transition at its core. So now it's grouped with that. So maybe Evan Fisher, can you tell us a bit what is special about the green transition in this context? And is the do no significant harm principle an ethical principle, something like the precautionary principle? And what role does it play in the green transition?
Yeah, just to start, I wanted to say I really like the idea for this format. Let's keep this all on our toes, so thank you so much. So the green transition and the do no significant harm principle. So the do no significant harm principle, I think it's Article 17 in the EU taxonomy regulation, and it's really a central component in the green transition. It really establishes the need to assess economic activities, investments, according to whether, how environmentally sustainable they are, to make sure they align with the EU's green objectives, with this, ultimate goal of attaining carbon neutrality in 2050. It also sets out what significant harm actually looks like, with, I think, the idea of kind of establishing a safeguard, preventing investments and policies from causing substantial harm to ecosystems, to the environment. So in that sense, I think it also sets out a kind of concrete, practical blueprint to how to move forward with the green transition. And maybe for us in the project, what's I think important to say is that it's something that also Mehlich Kritikos brought up in his presentation. It's how do we take this and how do we make it apply to research activities and not just economic activities and investments? What are the challenges and obstacles to that, to applying this to scientific activity and not just economic activity? So, yeah, thank you.
Questions concerning that? Now, when looking, oh yeah, a question.
Yeah, I don't have so much problems with the term transition, but I have more problems with the concept or the meaning of green, what green really means. So is milk still green? Is meat still green? Also in the bioeconomy debate, we have a lot of problems how to define the green in the green transition. I don't want to give an answer. It's really a question, and I think we need to discuss that very much in the project. And I learned also from funders that they have very often issues when they think about, oh, we only want to invest in green methodologies. But then it comes to debates on, is genetic engineering still green? Can we include it or not? What type of energy can we use? Zero CO2? Is nuclear energy zero CO2? What does that mean? So I think we need much more think tanks for the green instead of looking only at the transition issue. And that's, I think, a huge challenge for our project to define that, or to have at least some ideas. I don't think we should define it, but we should share some idea, in particular intercultural, that might be in South Africa different compared to Japan, Europe, even in different European countries.
So this is just a question. Are we not allowed to put another line between the do no significant harm principle and applied ethics? Because I think it would be really interesting to look a bit more into the concept again, because even though it's operationalized already, it doesn't say that we cannot reflect on it much more. And as you just challenge us to think about what counts as green, it's not just a practical question, it's also an ethical question. So I would suggest to put another line there, because that's really relevant to also reflect on. And then maybe we can come up with some other ideas of what it means to do no significant harm.
Thank you for these two comments. I think they are especially important for the work we are going to do in Work Package 1, which then has a strong implication on how Work Package 3 proceeds with those insights. Thank you. We talk a lot about implications or impacts, perhaps. Yeah, we have scientific impacts, economic impacts, societal impacts, and probably more of that, environmental impacts, of course. So I want to briefly talk about why would it be important to clarify what these are. I mean, also here we have first a broad range of impacts, but also maybe a rather vague idea. But I think there's one very important point to make why we look at more than, let's say, the outcome of an innovation project or innovation effort. That we want to be as holistic as possible, to say it like this, as broad as possible. Let's say, okay, I'll give you an example. Maybe that's the best thing. When there is a service robot developed for a hospital, I don't know, a pill bot deploying medication. So of course we have the group of engineers that will discuss what is a good design. We have to make sure it works, no parts fall off, it does its job reliably, and so on. So that's one outcome, perhaps, if it's a good robot. On the other side, of course, the robot will change things. It will change procedures in hospitals, and we want to understand how. Is it for someone's benefit? Yeah, the company developing the robots, of course, has economic questions. Is there a market for it? Who can pay for it? But on the much bigger scale, we can ask, what kind of actors does that give access to the healthcare system? Is there any system change? On the other dimension, or on the other end, there's individual implications. Let's say, what's the interaction between a patient and the robot? Is that, again, a design implication? Or, let's say, a simple thought of, let's say, autonomy and self-determination. If we figure out that this is a thing, it might it might give an incentive to the designers to add a button very visibly that at any moment you can stop this robot. So why would this be important? The starting point of that is a thought about the impacts or the implications on processes in the real world that then is fed back into the innovation process. So maybe we can also discuss this in terms of risks then. It's not about just toxicity or about life cycle assessments or market analysis and so on. It's much more about a normative assessment of the implications of scientific technological progress for individuals, for societies, perhaps institutions, and for systems. So thinking of this, that we want to be not, so to say, pinpoint looking at innovation outcomes, but at the broader perspective of progress here. It is clear, and I think also the service robot example shows that, it is nothing that an engineer alone could decide. We need to engage in conversation with as many stakeholders as possible. So we want to be inclusive, we want to be interdisciplinary and participatory. So that is the last keyword in this concept part, ecofeminism. And also this term was one of the first examples that that inspired us to have this session. Yeah, when someone says, nowadays you need these gender stuffs in such projects. I believe there's a strong misunderstanding of what this is about. So maybe Anke Stock, can you tell us, or can you clarify this misunderstanding? Why do we emphasize ecofeminism as an important conceptual framework for our project?
Well, thank you, first of all. We already spoke about the concepts in the beginning, and we realized that ecofeminism is probably, as a concept of its own, there maybe too much, but it definitely contributes to the holistic idea of the whole project. And the idea of ecofeminism, which is like 50 years old at least, is really that there is no liberation of women and no liberation of or no solution of the ecological crisis possible in a system that really depends on or is really based on domination. So this inequality aspect is very important. It has developed over the years because gender equality is more of all genders, so going beyond the binary of men and women. The intersectional aspects are also playing a huge role nowadays, so that has developed from there. And I think for that project, probably it's most important to see or to have a look at the ecofeminist critique of science. Knowledge collection is really based, or is happening also in a system that is based on social structures, traditional roles, on cultural norms, and they do not represent any inequalities or empower balances. And on the other hand, science is also, we had these terms already, often described as something objective and rational, and these attributes or characteristics are also going along classically, or in particular in the Western societies, with masculinity. And that's something where we also need to look beyond, and we need to look what can be happening in an integrative framework. So where is knowledge also based? Is it located at local levels, at grassroots levels? Vandana Shiva really looks at, for example, as one of the ecofeminists, famous one, at the integrative parts of local knowledge and grassroots knowledge. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm looking for fingers. I would have a comment to bridge. I mean, I would like to do one more term before the break. Because I want to send you into it. I have a plan in mind. Like I want to send you into it with an image, a strong image. So I want to do one more thing. I mean, we now talk about discourses. Discourses of different people getting together, figuring out what's the best thing to do, very broadly construed. So what comes to mind for me always is this idea of an ideal discourse, like following Habermas, for example. So the best outcome is that of an ideal discourse. So ecofeminism is the entity that will show this discourse is far from being ideal, and here's one way forward to make it a bit more ideal. Would that be in line with your idea?
Unfortunately, that's often our role, yeah.
Another element, and this is this last thing I want to come to now, in this idea of a discourse, is that, of course, people get together, but something needs to change, perhaps. Exchange of viewpoints doesn't mean we all come with ours and leave with one person's viewpoint back home, but we all modify it slightly. So one concept that is very important for that, I think, is the wide reflexive equilibrium, and this is very prominently placed in our project. But when talking to, let's say, sociologists, philosophers, and others, they all have a slightly different image of it. So I believe we need to clarify a bit on that, and Michel Bourbon, can you guide us a bit through the idea of what is the wide reflexive equilibrium and why do we need it for our multi-stakeholder discourses that we are looking for?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jan. Yeah, so the reflexive equilibrium is a very delicate exercise of balancing different considerations. So you can see it as a scale. On one tip of the scale, you put your basic moral judgments, so judgment about what is right and wrong. And on the other tip of the scale, you put basic principles, like principles of justice, and the arguments behind these principles. And if you find out that there is a discrepancy or disequilibrium between your ethical judgments and basic principles, then there are two ways to go forwards. Either you change your ethical judgment based on principles, or you go the other way around. So the notion of reflective equilibrium was introduced by the political philosopher John Rawls. And the way he conceived it at the beginning is one way as a method to try to justify his basic ethical considerations and test them against principles. So it started as a rather narrow exercise that one political philosopher can do by writing a book. And now it has moved to a much wider notion, as the name indicates, the wide reflective equilibrium, with the idea that every time we come up with a judgment about what is right and what is wrong, what is just or what is unjust, we need to take into account not only the theories with which we have affinities, because normatively or intuitively we find them very convincing, but we need to widen the scope of the ethical approach and take into account other ethical theories, but also, like we discussed before, a more intercultural approach. So if we are very certain about ethical judgment of ours, we need to confront it to other philosophical traditions, not only from the global north, but also from the global south. Not only that, but we also need to take into account the research outputs of other disciplines. So that's the other wider element. It's not only about widening to other cultures, it's also widening to other disciplines. And only when you do those different exercises of widening your consideration can you come up with a truly justified ethical judgment at the end of the day. So that's how it works. And here you have one possible way to think about this. It's a constant exercise of back and forth between theories, principles, and considered judgments. But hopefully the outcome of this exercise is that your considered judgments will be more convincing both for you and for the people in front of you, whether they are students, other scholars, decision makers. So that's the structure of this method.
Thank you very much. I have a question, because I'm always not sure if I'm right with my image, because I studied chemistry, so maybe this whole image is too chemical, so to say. It's like molecules in their kind of vibrational equilibrium. So this is not rehearsed now, and I know it's a bit tricky because we'll be on video and we can be judged on it. And I hope you remember this image, but I also worry you remember this image. But maybe what I want to, can I ask you to come, because this is, my idea is that somehow you are comfortable with your perspective if you take it isolated and unchallenged. That means if we assume we are all sufficiently rational or reasonable, we choose reasons for our commitments, for our decisions, so we can illustrate that in the form of some kind of equilibrium of vibration. So mine would kind of look like this perhaps, okay? So I vibrate like this. But yours is different. You come from different perspective. You vibrate maybe like this, okay? So you can vibrate like this, and I vibrate like this. And now we have an interdisciplinary research project. We want to somehow come together. It doesn't work. Like we can't meet, right? And now I go home and say, Michel has a very weird idea. You know, it doesn't match. It doesn't resonate. To speak with Hartmut Rosa, for example, I just can't figure out. Like, how can he think like this? I have to change myself. So we meet again. I said, I thought about it. Let's try. And we kind of modulate a bit, and then somehow, maybe in the end, we vibrate in this. So now we have a wide reflexive equilibrium because we exchange, and the equilibrium is not only individual, but somehow in a wider context. And if we all do it together, maybe after 3 years of project, we vibrate in the same mode, and then then the outcome of it is much better than if we all worked individually at our desks. Is this a good image?
Yeah, I couldn't describe it better.
Okay. Time for coffee, but don't vibrate when having it.